What happens when empires end but their shadows remain? Postcolonial theory unravels the tangled legacies of colonization, power, identity, and resistance, asking us to see how history still speaks in our culture, our language, and even our imagination. Hi everyone, welcome back to Literature with Jaisal. Today we are talking about one of the most important literary theories you'll come across in English literature, the postcolonial theory. In this video, you'll find out what it means, why it matters, and will even be able to connect it to novels and films you already know. So, what is postcolonial theory? Postcol theory studies the cultural, political, and literary impact of colonialism and imperialism and the responses of formerly colonized societies. When we hear postcolonial, we think after colonialism. That's partly right, but it's not only about the period after independence. It focuses on three things: how colonizers represented the colonized through stereotypes and Orientalism, how colonized people responded through resistance, hybrid identities, and rewriting history. Third, how literature reflects the struggle for identity, language, and self representation. In simple words, postcolonialism asks who gets to tell the story? The colonizer, who often portrayed the colonized as backward and inferior, or the colonized themselves, who wanted to reclaim their voices. For example, think of a Bollywood movie where a British officer looks down upon Indians for eating with their hands. That's a colonial stereotype. Post colonial literature flips the script, showing Indian culture from the Indian perspective. Let's now study the historical background of this theory. Colonialism, 16th to 20th century, saw European powers ruling large parts of Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Colonizers imposed their languages, education system, and cultural values. Literature often portrayed colonized people as exotic, primitive, or inferior, reinforcing power hierarchies. After independence movements, that is around the mid 20th century, writers and scholars began writing back to the empire, reclaiming history and cultural identity. The three pillars of post-colonial thought include Edward Said, Homi Ke Bhabha, and Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak. Our first big name in this theory is Edward Said, who wrote Orientalism in 1978. His main idea was that the West constructed the East, Asia, Middle East, Africa, as the other, mysterious, irrational, and backward, to justify colonial domination. Said argued that Europe created an image of the Orient, basically the East, as exotic, mysterious, and backward. Why? To justify their own superiority and domination. Literature, travel writing, and art portrayed the Orient in exotic stereotypes. For example, think of Disney's Aladdin. The Middle East is shown as a land of magic carpets, snake charmers, belly dancers, and dangerous villains. In short, Orientalism is about stereotypes. The East as irrational and weak, the West as rational and strong. In Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, he writes African history from the Igbo perspective, countering colonial stereotypes of Africans as primitive. It shows how colonial literature misinterpreted African society, religion, and culture. In another example, let's take the 2001 movie Lagan. The British are shown as arrogant rulers, while Indians are portrayed as simple rural people. A reversal, but still a stereotype. Next, we have Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, an Indian theorist. Her most famous essay is Can the Subaltern Speak? Subaltern are the marginalized, voiceless groups, peasants, women, lower classes, who are excluded from both colonial and elite discourses. Spivak argues that even when we try to represent the subaltern, we often end up speaking for them rather than letting them speak. Subaltern are basically the people at the very bottom of the power structures, those who are doubly silenced. Spivak's argument is that even when intellectuals try to give voice to the subaltern, They often end up speaking for them, not letting them speak for themselves. Imagine a news anchor talking about poor farmers, but the farmers themselves never appear on the screen. Their voices are mediated, filtered, or erased. Let's take another example. In colonial India, both the British rulers and Indian elites wrote about widows and sati, but these women themselves were rarely given a chance to narrate their own experiences. That's what Spivak tries to highlight. Now let's talk about Homi Bhabha, another giant of post-colonial studies. He gives us three very important concepts: hybridity, mimicry, and the third space. Hybridity. Colonized people don't simply resist or assimilate. Instead, they create new mixed cultural identities. So when two cultures meet, something new is created. Colonized people don't just copy the colonizers, they mix cultures and create hybrid identities. For example, the Indian English. We use English but with Indian words, food names, and idioms. It's not pure English or pure Hindi, it's something hybrid. In Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children, Salim Sinai embodies India's hybrid identity where East meets West and tradition meets modernity. In here, the language itself is hybrid, English mixed with Indian idioms, reflecting post colonial hybridity. In the Netflix series Never Have I Ever, Devi Vishwakumar struggles with Indian traditions at home and American teen life at school. Cultures mix and create new in between identities. That's hybridity. Mimicry. Colonized people often imitate the colonizer, but with difference. This almost the same but not quite creates unease and can undermine colonial authority. Example: in colonial India, many Indians dressed like the British, spoke English, and followed British etiquette, but their difference still showed, which made the colonizers uneasy. In the movie English Winglish, Sashi learns English to fit in, but her accent and style remains different, showing the limits of mimicry. The third space, a cultural in between zone where hybridity thrives. It's not fully Western, not fully native, it's a third space of negotiation. For example, diaspora kids growing up in the US or the UK, they eat pizza at school but biryani at home, celebrate Halloween but also Diwali. They live in that third space. Other voices in post-colonial theory include Frantz Fanon, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Chinua Achebe. Fanon wrote The Wretched of the Earth and spoke about the psychological trauma of colonization. Colonized people internalizing feelings of inferiority, while Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote Decolonizing the Mind and called for writing in native languages. With novels like Things Fall Apart, Achebe rewrote history from an African perspective, showing Igbo culture before Europeans arrived. Key themes in post colonial theory: first, representation. Who tells the story? Colonizers often misrepresented colonized societies. Post colonial writers rewrite history from their own perspective. Second, language. English, French, Spanish became colonial tools. Post colonial theory debates whether to write in colonial languages or indigenous ones. Third, identity. Colonization creates fragmented hybrid identities. Many post colonial characters feel in between cultures. Fourth, resistance. Literature often becomes a weapon of resistance, reclaiming suppressed voices. For example, in The White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, Rhys gives voice to Bertha Mason, the mad woman in the attic from Jane Eyre, rewriting the colonial narrative from a silenced perspective. Fifth, diaspora. Migration and exile create new cultural identities, linking directly to the diasporic studies. In The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri, Gogol struggles with Indian heritage and American upbringing, an example of diasporic identity. Post-colonial theory teaches us that literature and films are not just entertainment. They are battlegrounds of history, identity, and power. By reading stories through this lens, we uncover voices that were once silenced and celebrate cultures once suppressed. Thank you.